Happy summertime, everybody. Another time for Dallas Cowboys Overtime here on StarTelegram.com. I am Fort Worth Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel. He is Mr. Dallas Cowboys know-it-all, Nick Harris. Nick, you look especially dashing and radiant. Is it because we are finally in that part of the calendar where there is nothing going on with the football team at all? This is the deadest of dead times.
May or may not be taking a 2.5-week vacation in the next month. It is truly the deadest of the dead times. The only things going around this time is camps that players are putting on, youth camps. That's about the only thing you might see me pop out at. And we'll have a Micah Parsons contract to talk about as well.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't bring it up, and we were exchanging ideas, and we're yielding to your expertise for the topics of this episode. And we did not have Micah Parsons' contract. But since you brought it up, now we took bets on this, and I took the over. And you were the young optimist, like, oh, no, it'll be done in 20 minutes. And now Micah Parsons is even going on social media to say the longer they wait, the more it's going to cost, which is a point of concern that everybody has ever pointed out who's followed the Cowboys when they work out long-term deals with their star players, be it CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, although that was more of a holdout leverage situation. Nick, is this going to get done? I mean, it's going to get done, but will it get done before the start of training camp, which is July 25?
Yeah, that's where my optimism is starting to decrease a little bit as far as timing goes. Just because Micah Parsons isn't really giving them a pressing deadline yet. And you know this front office. The deadline is what makes the deal. And for all intents and purposes, Micah Parsons is going to be out at training camp. He said he's already gotten his place out there. So it's affirmed that he's going to be out in Oxnard. When asked if he was going to be participating on the field, he said, we'll see. So maybe that's the part of the deadline that, Jerry Jones would like to see Micah Parsons on the field. But nevertheless, until there is a deadline, and maybe the deadline is week 1 of the season, I don't feel like a deal is going to get done.
Do they really need to see him on the field before week 1?
No, absolutely not. I mean, in a new defensive system, there's going to be some key days at training camp, absolutely, especially there towards the end when everybody pretty much figures out what the 53-man roster is going to look like, who's going to be with the ones and the twos, and so they can get used to being on the field with Micah Parsons together, especially with that elite pass rush group that they do have. It would benefit them to have Micah on the field in Oxnard. Do not get me wrong. But could they do without it? Absolutely. It's not a situation like Dak and CD last year where, it's crucial in Oxnard for them to build that rhythm, build that timing. And sure, there's a lot of rhythm and timing things that would help Micah for sure. But again, not as pressing.
August 15th. That was my imaginary fantasy date. Is that a realistic one?
I think it could be. They get back from Oxnard on August 14th. So that would put them, give them a day in Frisco to maybe work something out. But also there's going to be a lot of time there in Oxnard for them to work something out. Deals have gotten done out there before. I think back to Trayvon Diggs a couple of years ago. That was a deal that came together in Oxnard in the cafeteria there. And the Terrence Steele deal a couple of years ago, while it did officially get done in Frisco, they were putting the groundwork together back in Oxnard. So it's certainly something that they could do. And it's the only contract left on their docket. And there's not any other extension that I don't think that they will be looking to make. I think they should make a Deron Bland extension. I think they should go ahead and get done a deal with Jake Ferguson. But the Micah Parsons one seems to be the only one on the docket. So just get it done in Oxnard and launch into the season.
It never ceases to amaze me at the casualness that this front office has. And I know where it comes from. It comes from generational wealth and the fact that they don't view as having to get this done as any more beneficial today than it would be in 3 weeks. Like, okay, we're going to go fishing. We're going to go out in the Maldives and see if we can catch a 800-foot shark. And they can. And really, what are the consequences? Even though Stephen Jones said in a local interview, one of the big mistakes that he thought he made was waiting as long as they did on the original Dak Prescott contract extension because it cost him more. Nothing has changed since then. And that's what they had been doing, and that's what they will continue to do. Do you see any reason at all whatsoever why this management will change their attitude and approach to long-term contracts to superstar players.
I do not, because there's a phrase that Jerry Jones throws out a lot, and it's specifically in reference to when he's trying to make a deal with another team, whether it be a trade around draft time for draft picks or for other players. He said, if once you pick up the phone first, you lose the deal. That is his mindset. That is his mind frame. And it's a very similar approach to how he approaches these contracts. Well, if you pick up the phone to set up the meeting with David Mulugeta, the agent that he claims he doesn't know, then he thinks he loses the deal. So, it's a bold strategy, Cotton.
Well, I think in a lot of cases I can see how that would fit and apply. In an NFL CBA where everything is so slotted and basically so predetermined by percentages almost, I don't see really what there is to gain if Jerry picks up the phone right now or whether the agent picks up the phone right now. The parameters and the precedents have been set by Myles Garrett or whomever else, and you're basically just going off of that. Am I wrong?
Absolutely not. Me and you could figure out the number right now. If they were to get a deal done tomorrow, I'm pretty sure, Mac, we'd get pretty damn close to figuring out what exactly the contract is, because it's that easy to predict. It's that easy to get done, in my opinion. But if TJ Watt gets done or if Trey Hendrickson gets done, that number changes. It moves up. And then we look at a different number that we're predicting months from now or weeks from now, however it may be. It does baffle me too, Mac, and I don't understand why they don't just go ahead and get these things done.
All right. Well, you have been out there for all of the OTAs this offseason as well as minicamp, and this is a good chance to pick your brain. What were your initial impressions so far of the Brian Schottenheimer era for your Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, when he's talking the talk about energy and vibes at practice, you certainly feel that. You feel it at OTAs, you feel it at minicamp. How does that translate to wins? I have no idea. Don't ask me that question. But the energy is certainly there. You kind of feel that this coaching staff, they're connecting with their guys on a level that it looks like a second or third year staff already, which is a good thing for sure. Again, how does that translate to wins? We'll see. But I would say in the meantime, for what an OTAs and a minicamp is under this new CBA, which is basically underwear Olympics. They can't put pads on. They can't be physical. They can't hit anybody. For what it is, in all intents and purposes, and Brian Schottenheimer said it in his exit press conference, he said they had a strong offseason, and I would have to agree. They brought in some key pieces, and those key pieces are already rolling on the field. We'll talk about one here in a minute. But you talk about a guy like Joe Milton as a backup quarterback. We've seen a lot of him, and he's firmly running with the twos. You can talk about Tyler Booker, the first-round pick. He has taken all of the snaps at left guard with the first team, and that was something that under Mike McCarthy, we were always bashing him over the head with. It's like, hey, you drafted this rookie. Why isn't he repping with the first team when you know he's going to start in September? Well, Brian Schottenheimer's not taking that approach. It's Tyler Booker is starting at right guard, and he has that job until he loses it. That's another fresh face that they've been able to integrate in OTA and minicamp. But overall, because of the lack of physicality that you can do in OTAs and minicamp, there's not a whole lot of stock you can put into a lot of things with the offseason program. But I think the things you do look for are guys that have clearly made offseason physical improvements, that look a lot better. Who would fall under that category? Tyler Guyton at left tackle, Awesome Richards as a backup left tackle, Brevin Spanford, who I wrote about on the Star Telegram yesterday on Monday, talking about his offseason improvement. I think he's probably tied in too when they line up in week one. And that's another discussion we'll get into here in a bit. On the defensive side of the ball, Kyer Elam, another fresh face, looked really good physically and had registered a pass breakup at every single offseason program availability that we had, which, again, is tough to do because you can't really be physical in those settings. And so that's a healthy surprise for a team that is reeling at corner when it comes to the health of that room. Other offseason guys, I would have to take a look at Amir Leofau. Looks a little bit bigger in his upper body. He's working mainly with the second team unit. And when they bring in the dime package, he comes in as a pass coverage linebacker and some situational blitzing as well. But you're seeing similar usage with guys like that under Matt Eberflus that you saw under Mike Zimmer. I don't think it's going to be too different of a system defensively. And then offensively, it feels like they're integrating a lot of the same things from McCarthy with one big change being motion. And there's motion almost every pre-snap, which is going to be finally the Dallas Cowboys have entered the 21st century offensively. And they're going to be integrating some motion.
So one big buzzword, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Nick? Did you have another thought? Okay. So one big buzzword we're hearing now to the point where it's just oversaturated and become cliche is culture, culture, culture. Brian Schottenheimer's obviously stressed it. I wrote about it the other day and started talking about what some of the things that he's done to try to change it a little bit and put his, I guess, imprint on what that means for the Dallas Cowboys. And my big question about it is that the culture really under the Cowboys hasn't been that bad under Jason Garrett, under Mike McCarthy. It was pretty good. I think you would say that was a professional team that went out and behaved and played professionally. Not always well. Sometimes you get their butts kicked, but that was a professional team. The only time that I'd really seen in other examples of being around this team was the culture around Wade Phillips disintegrated quick when things went wrong. Dave Campo, the same way. And obviously now we're going back in the 20th century, so who cares? But as relates to this, can Brian Schottenheimer and this culture that he's engendered, can he keep it together, do you think, when it goes sideways? Can he keep it together? And when those guys listen and respect him, when CeeDee Lamb gets mad at number 4, or when Michael Parsons does whatever, or any of these guys, I've named 2 guys, but when it goes sideways or south and people start pointing fingers and family members and brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins and friends start saying, did you hear what this guy said? Did you hear what that guy said? This guy's saying this, and it just kind of starts to come apart. Because right now it's easy. They haven't lost a game. But when they lose, because it's going to happen, when they lose, Nick, do you think he's got it in him that room will respect his authority and the culture that he's trying to build?
And that's going to be his big first hurdle is what does he do when the adversity hits? Yeah. I tend to lean toward it depends on the severity of the circumstance. Like, let's say it's a situation where it's, Micah leaving the field last year in the Cincinnati game with 30 seconds left in the game, and he hits the locker room before everybody else. I think that's a situation that Brian Schottenheimer could control. I think that's a situation where he could bring him into his office and be like, hey, we can't do that, dog. Like, that's not what we're doing here. We go out as a team. We come in as a team, blah, blah, all of that. Why do I think that he's been very intentional about having multiple dinners with players throughout this offseason program. And it's taken him to one of the restaurants in the Star District and just getting to know them. They don't talk football. They just sit there and they talk life. And Schottenheimer has said, I'm doing that so for when these tough situations do arise, we can have those tough conversations. And, we have some pre-established relationship there to where there's respect there. And I respect that approach. I think it will work in certain instances. I also think there are certain instances where it might not. You think back to the Ravens game last year when CeeDee Lamb is, telling Dak Prescott and Zach Martin basically to screw off, and he misses media after the game. I think that's probably a situation that might be a little tougher for Brian Schottenheimer. I think, is CeeDee Lamb impossible to have a conversation with? Absolutely not. And eventually that's what happened with Mike McCarthy. It got itself worked out, so on and so forth. But there's going to be instances as a head coach that Brian Schottenheimer, Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, it doesn't matter who you are, will not be able to solve. And so how does Brian Schottenheimer handle the adversity of that? Also, if they start 3-5, how do they handle the adversity of that? Do they bring that ping pong table out of the locker room all of a sudden? Right. When does things start to snowball? How does he handle that? That's going to be his biggest first hurdle.
I think he has one huge advantage in this regard, and that is the respect for the quarterback. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Cowboys, for the most part, have avoided big, loud, noisy episodes for the most part, because everybody in that room has a tremendous amount of respect for number 4. You heard it in Tyron Smith's retirement press conference. You heard it in Zach Martin's retirement press conference. Those guys, all of them, especially the older ones, have a tremendous amount of respect for the professional that Dak Prescott is. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be lighted up and turn in the second coming Tom Brady or any of that other stuff. But in terms of guys saying, this is what we're doing and this is what we're doing, I would say for the most part, Dak Prescott is Brian Schottenheimer's greatest friend right now. Yeah. And a point that we brought up, I don't know who said it. Maybe it was Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin mentioned it during the interview process, which is what happens when Brian Schottenheimer has to confront some of those guys who went to bat for him to get that job. And Michael's point was, wait a minute, we went to bat for you to get you the job, and now you got the job, and you're going to do me like this? Yeah. Oh, I see how you are. Yeah. And I don't know, you spent way more time around him than I have. How's his personality built for that kind of confrontation and conversation with a young professional who's empowered and emboldened by his job status, fame, and production?
You talking about Dak Prescott specifically?
No, I'm talking about Brian Schottenheimer and dealing with those pipe, what we call them, interesting personalities.
Yeah, I think there's a level of getting ahead of the 8 ball here that Brian Schottenheimer is trying to do here in the offseason. I think there's a little bit more focus on those interesting personalities when it comes to what he's trying to approach. And look, there's going to be, an Israel Makwamu, or there's going to be a, Sadiq Charles or Rob Jones that might be a little more interesting than, he probably has time for. Yeah. And that is a situation where if an issue arises during the season with one of those, how does he handle that? Guys he maybe didn't have time to go to dinner with, during the off season. And I think he's built for it. He has not only been an assistant for 25 years, he has, been a son to Marty Schottenheimer, who won 200 games in the NFL. He has seen a lot of issues, and he has seen a lot of how they work and how they don't work, how to solve those issues and how to not solve those issues. I think he has a lot of skins on the wall when it comes to those kinds of things. I think back to his tenure with the Jets. I think back to his tenure with the Seahawks. There were a lot of issues that, came about and that he had to approach and face head on. And he's talked about openly, publicly about how he wishes he did certain things differently, and that he's also pulling things from those times and those eras as well. I think it's perfect timing for him to be in this spot because I do think he is prepared to take on the adversity and to take on the scrutiny that this job does hold. And that was one of the questions I had for him during minicamp is, that Super Bowl trophy and getting a 6th one, it holds over this building so heavily. And when the expectations are not met and it's just, being right back to where you were 2 years ago, whether it be a wild card loss or 3 years ago when they're not even, or 5 years ago, I guess, when they're not even making the playoffs, how do you plan on getting through the adversity of that? And he's like, well, we're not going to be in that situation to begin with. I was like, okay, we'll see. And so I wonder how, he does handle the losses, how he does handle, a bad injury. If Dak Prescott goes down and everyone's looking around like, hey, this season is shot. How does he get them back up? Because I think McCarthy did a commendable job last year in doing so. Yeah, I agree. But there's going to be some challenges for him that we are all going to be looking around and being like, okay, how does Brian attack this?
Well, obviously the most high profile and curious example of this potential situation involves the biggest pickup that the Cowboys made in the offseason by trading for former Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. Now, I know it's the offseason. It's OTAs, it's minicamp. Everybody's saying the right things, but you've had a chance to see him. We saw what he could do on the highlight reel when he was with the Steelers with quarterbacks that I think everybody would agree you would say, I'm not so sure about this.
Yeah.
He's got a guy now, by far and away, will be the most accomplished and established quarterback that he will have played with in his pro career. What did you see so far from George Pickens that made you not only go, holy cow, but other things that you thought, oh, okay, this might work. This may not be such a bad idea after all.
I'm going to point to 3 things. First, it was the first couple of OTA availabilities that we had in Frisco. George Pickens was not getting a target, much less a catch. If it was in the last 5-10 minutes of practice. And I wonder if it was intentional. I wonder if it was a situation, it's like, okay, the media's out here. We're not going to throw to Pickens because we're going to, see how he deals with it and see how patient he is. And he approached that perfectly. There was no, walking or sulking off the field. It was walking up to Kevontae Turpin and, dapping him up and saying, hey, what's up, man? Like, let's get out of here. Let's grab lunch or something. And it was not met with attitude. And I think that was probably his first big test. That was just me viewing it as an outsider. Second big thing, and this was on the field. This was during it was during the last OTA availability. And Dak Prescott, they're working in red zone 7-on-7. and he's having to work off script. Secondary's doing a good job covering the play. He's having to work off script. And who do you see working off script with him is George Pickens, a guy that had only been in the building for about 2.5, 3 weeks at that point. And they're able to find the sideline, and Dak puts it on the money. George Pickens fully extends his body outside of the sideline, catches it, tiptoes in the sideline for a touchdown. Everyone's looking around like, wow, like that's pretty impressive. And the thing that stood out to me is how well they worked off script there when they had only been teammates for less than a month. And if they get that rhythm built during minicamp, if they get that rhythm built even more during training camp, it could be a real weapon as soon as week 1 for this team if they are able to work off script like that and to be able to be on the same page. And Dak has spent a lot of time with George Pickens in this last month and a half. And it was funny because it was an instance where we were talking to Dak in the locker room off the record, just talking about SEC football and, whatever else. Dak's really good about those kinds of conversations. Yep. And who walks up and sits right next to him? George Pickens, the guy who, we all expected when he arrived is anti-media. We don't want to talk to I don't want to talk to them. They don't want to talk to me. So we're just going to, split and be all right there. But he came and sat right next to Dak, and he hopped right in the conversation. We start talking about Alabama high school football and SEC football. And he talks a little trash to CeeDee Lamb, who's walking out because he thinks he has an SEC football team. There was a lot of different things that I took away from that conversation. And I was like, you know what? George is, I give Dak Prescott credit because he has said this line multiple times since George has arrived. He said, I didn't listen to all the noise when he got in here. I wanted to judge him for himself. And so far, I've liked what I've seen. I agree. And if I had done that, where if I just judged for myself when he came into the building, I'd probably have the same exact return. It's going to be a fascinating marriage. And again, there's going to be an issue that pops up with George Pickens. How does he approach that? That's another part of it. But so far, man, really 100% so good.
So I'm going to ask you a football question. This is something that Tony Romo taught me unintentionally years ago. And I knew one of the points of frustration with one of his former receivers, Terrell Owens, who was a talented guy, but obviously a personality, is that Terrell did not, Tony used the expression, give me his eyes. Now, I'm using this, I doubt Tony will see this, but I think now that I think about this, I think this conversation was just a conversation between me and a couple of reporters. And the whole idea was, will the wide receiver, and it's not just Terrell, but in this case it was Terrell, but will the wide receiver, Nick, give me his eyes when you talk about going off script, or maybe there's an alignment that says, I've got a route here, but I might get hit. I might put myself in a vulnerable position. And Terrell, at that point in his career, he was in his 30s when he came here, didn't want to do it anymore. And if you go back and look at that time, and there's no reason for you to do it, but he did not put himself in that position. You know those kinds of positions I'm talking about. But receivers who do that, who give their quarterback a target in potentially difficult spots and say, I trust you, trust me, we're going to make this work, is worth a lot. That goes a long way. Anything that you saw or have seen from George Pickens when he was with the Steelers and an obviously really limited time with the Cowboys gives you an indication that if Dak Prescott says, I'm going to go here, this may be expensive for you, but we can do it. Will he do it?
Yeah, and we already saw that because there was DBs draped over him on that play that I was talking about in the red zone. And in a real setting, he probably does take a hit there, but underwear Olympics. I think there's going to be a healthy marriage there, and we've already seen that. And it's funny because if there is a healthy marriage and it's fantastic, then we have another contract to talk about next offseason.
Yeah, they'll push that to the 11th hour as well. Okay, Dallas Cowboys training camp begins in Oxnard, California, I think on July 25. Do I have that date right, Nick?
July 21st.
July 21st. Okay, so we're almost a month away. It's early, obviously. What are some potential battles, position battles, are you predicting will be interesting to watch for not only cut down day, but the depth chart and the starting lineup?
Yeah, I wanted to point to two different position groups. Well, I'll point to three actually off rip here. We'll start on the defensive side of the ball, and we'll start with defensive tackle with Mazi Smith being the picture there. I think Mazi Smith is going to be the starter in week one. How short?
Do you really?
I do, unfortunately.
Okay.
This
is just law? I mean, there's nobody else.
This is kind of proof that the one tech position in the NFL is in such a dire situation these days, is because Mazi Smith is a serviceable starter, and he would probably be a serviceable starter on a lot of other teams as well. But he's just not been able to get the job done. The reason I put training camp battle here, though, how short is his leash? If he starts 3-4 weeks through the season and it's not going well, they have a big Samoan in Jay Toya that is ready to go and could push him, I believe, in training camp. Why? He's more of a run stopper. He had more run stops last year in 12 games with UCLA than Mazi Smith did in 17 games last year with the Dallas Cowboys. I know there's different levels of competition there, but it's something to take away. He is coming into the NFL as a purebred run stopper at 335 pounds, 6'2". I think that's a battle to keep an eye on.
Okay, hang on. I'm gonna cut you off for the question about with Mazi Smith. Mazi, when you look at him, put him in a uniform, probably in a weight room as well.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it all looks like it's there. Is this just a matter of a young man who really just doesn't know how to play the position?
The biggest thing that has kind of turned me onto the train of Mazi Smith is just not the answer. And it's really happened in this offseason, is we saw how Mazi Smith's rookie season went. Wasn't great as a first-round pick. We saw how his second season went. Not great. On the flip side, we saw how Tyler Guyton's rookie season went. Also not great. And very similar, you could draw some parallels to how Mazi Smith's rookie year went. How we have seen Tyler Guyton approach this offseason versus how Mazi Smith has approached these last two offseasons, stark difference. And it's Tyler Guyton being the first guy back in the facility when they allowed players back in. It's him, going under Tyler Smith's wing and being like, what can I do? Them completely reshaping their diet, getting in the weight room every day. Him looking at all his film, looking at all his penalties from last year and trying to figure out what he can do to be better about that. It's maturity. It's the professionalism. We haven't seen that from Mazi Smith. And, when we try to go interview Tyler Guyton during OTAs and minicamp, he sits there and he talks about his mistakes for 11 minutes that he had last year. When we try to go to Mazi Smith, you want to guess how much time we got?
Nothing.
45 seconds.
He did more than I thought.
45 seconds.
I was really impressed with Guyton's ability to talk to us last year and just his willingness to own it. Good and bad. I mean, just the reality of it. But I'm like, that was pretty impressive. Not everybody wants to do that. And I was kind of impressed by that.
Yeah. So that's where I look at Mazi Smith and I ask myself, does he want it? And I don't think he does. And he hasn't shown it, at least. And that's going to be a problem when he has a hungry rookie trying to take his spot. And I think that's going to be the case here in training camp.
What are one or two other training camp battles are you curious about?
Cornerback's going to be fascinating with Trayvon Diggs and Savone Revel. Which of those two guys, if they get either of those two guys back during training camp, the expectation is that they will get Revel back at some point during training camp. And when he's thrown into the mix, will he be competing for a starting job right away? You have one corner that is safely starting week one. That's Deron Bland. The only question is he starting on the outside or is he starting on the inside? If he's starting on the inside, then you need two outside guys. I think Kyer Elam is really starting to figure out his role on this defense, and I think he will be a safe starter in week one. How long does he last? That'll probably be a bigger question. He had some issues in Buffalo and lost his starting job pretty quick. Is it a different scenario here in Dallas, or does the same kind of story play out? And if so, who comes in after him? And then Trayvon Diggs, I expect him to be back around week 5, week 6. That's probably the expectation of when he'll return from his knee injury. Other guys that are thrown into that mix, though, that could start at slot or on the outside. You have Israel Mukuamu, who's gotten a lot of work with the ones, both in the slot and on the outside. Keemon Hall, a North Texas Fighting Mean Green has gotten some work on the inside and on the outside as well. I wonder if they add another veteran body there. I think that's certainly an option. And then I'm going to look at the tight end room. I know I spoke about it a little bit earlier. I think this is a big, big training camp for Luke Schoonmaker. His status as tight end 2 is being heavily threatened by Brevin Spanford. Spanford has increased his role as a receiver here during the offseason program, and that's going to be the biggest thing for him. At 6'7", 270 pounds, he can be a red zone weapon for this offense if he's able to put it all together. And in talking to people and in looking at the offseason practices, it certainly looks like he's starting to put it together.
Okay, last topic. We always have to go through this every training camp. because usually there's one or two guys who are highly susceptible to being released. Happens on every team. Sometimes guys have to do it. Sometimes they avoid it. There's one name. I was writing down some lists as I was looking down a guy up and down the list of people who might be a surprise cut. Certainly, Trayvon Diggs has been something that's been a name that's kicked around. You think he's going to come back by week 5. He clearly has not been the same since the ACL injury he suffered 2 years ago. And now he suffered another injury. So he's obviously going to come back. But what will he be when he does? The one that interests me is a player that the Cowboys traded for last season in wide receiver Jonathan Mingo, a guy who really didn't give him much. Now, I know this is a thin group. It's deeper than it was because they got Pickens. But to me, even though they gave up a 4 or 5 to get Mingo, he strikes me as a guy that this new staff may say, good luck. Is he vulnerable?
I don't think he's as vulnerable as some of the others in that room. I think his job is safe for now. That's how I would characterize him. Now, if he came out in the preseason and training camp and he was just a hot bag of buns, then he's probably on the chopping block, because I think the leash is short in that room. By adding George Pickens and by keeping Kevontae Turpin around, there's going to be one or two guys that we've been used to seeing on this roster the last couple of years that will not make it, whether that be a Jalen Brooks or a Ryan Flanoy. It could even be a Jonathan Mingo or a Jalen Tolbert. If they show up and it's not up to standard. You think about the safe receivers in that room. You got CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Kevontae Turpin. After that, you have about 5 guys competing for 2 spots, and that's going to be where things get interesting for sure.
Anybody else that you look at on this team? Terrence Steele is a guy who has struggled since he came back from was it an Achilles injury that he had?
It was ACL. I think he's safe. I think he's safe. And this coaching staff change, and I think I've mentioned it on this podcast, this coaching staff change benefits no player more than it does Terrence Steele.
Why is that?
Getting an offensive line coach as your OC to be able to work with him. Getting an offensive line coach that is already assimilating with what Terrence Steele is trying to do. I mean, simply put, the Mike Solari system and with Terrence Steele was not met with a lot of joy. I'll say that. I think there was a lot of miscommunication, a lot of deception at times too between those two, and they never really had a good relationship. And so I think getting a new offensive line coach, getting a new OC who specializes on the O-line, this should help Terrence Steele. And if they do what Clayton Adams has been doing in Arizona over the last couple of years and getting these guys out in space and getting them moving, I think that benefits Terrence Steele a lot. So I think Terrence Steele is safe. One guy I am looking at that I think could be fascinating is Donovan Wilson at safety. He's been away from he's been on the sideline rehabbing a minor knee procedure that he had when the season ended. So he was not working on the field with the team during the offseason program. And we saw a lot of Wanye Thomas. And Wanye Thomas is a guy that the coaching staff has praised over and over throughout the years. He's been on the 53-man roster now for 2 years. He's heading into the final year of his rookie deal. It could be a situation where they throw Wanye Thomas to the Wolves and be like, okay, let's see what you got. You think back to times last year when Donovan Wilson was pulled in the middle of games, Wanye Thomas. So Donovan Wilson is one that I am keeping an eye on as a surprise cut. And then Deuce Vaughn, we put in the picture there. I think there is going to be – I don't know if that's necessarily a surprise to some people, but, just based on how his first 2 years went in the NFL and how he didn't get a ton of opportunities, it wouldn't surprise me if Deuce Vaughn might be looking for work elsewhere in August.
The Donovan Wilson one makes sense because – he was a surprise developing player. He's a 5th-round guy out of A&M, certainly willing. We've seen guys that this organization has tried at safety, and they'll try. I mean, no one can question, I think, Donovan Wilson's effort level or willingness to stick his nose in there and do his best for the team. He will. But his ability, I think he's regressed. I don't think he's maxed out anymore. I think he's regressed. There was a window in there. You're like, well, this guy's pretty good. He's pretty good. Not great, but he's pretty good. He's solid. And then it seems like he's taken a step back. And then the other part, there are times where he got so exploited in pass coverage that I couldn't blame any defensive coordinator or head coach who sat there and said, who else we got? Because we might be getting in the way of progress by not allowing the guy behind him to play. And in this case, it's Thomas. So I think Wilson's playing for I think Wilson this offseason or this training camp is playing for 31 other teams as much as he is for the team that he's on.
And something that was really fascinating coming out of the draft is whenever these guys sign their undrafted free agents, you can most of the time you can look at the money and you can chase the money and see, okay, who's getting the most guaranteed cash. Yeah. And if you look over the course of these last 2 years, the guy who had the most guaranteed cash ended up on the 53-man roster. Hunter Lipke in 2023, Brevin Spanford in 2024. Going into 2025, the guy with the most guaranteed money in that undrafted class is Elijah Clark, safety out of Syracuse. So if a safety is going to find his way onto the 53-man with that much guaranteed money, not saying it's going to happen, but just kind of looking at the trends, whose spot does he take? It's not going to be Malik Hooker. Marquise Bell, they just re-signed to a 3-year deal. It's not going to be him. And I think they want to see the progress from Wanye Thomas. So that leaves Donovan Wilson. Is that going to be the guy that they maybe cut ties with to see what the progress looks like around the room? That'd be my question.
Last question, I'll let you go. So for the last couple of years, the Dallas Cowboys backup quarterback position was actually pretty good compared to other NFL teams. And the whole idea with the backup quarterback is, can you put in a guy who can move an NFL offense? And if you have to play him for 5 weeks, can you be pretty competitive with the chance to win? Cooper Rush, against all odds, did that. Yeah. Seriously, I have just so much respect for Cooper Rush because he lasted when he shouldn't have lasted, and he figured it out, and now he changed his life forever because he stuck around with the NFL team. He was a good guy. He was a good teammate. Dak Prescott liked him. That stuff matters if you're a backup quarterback. It really matters. Are you good in the room? Are you preparing? Are you upbeat? Are you optimistic? Are you early? Do you stay late? Do you do all those things that signifies, I take this job seriously and I'm grateful to be here?
I will say it's going to be very fascinating if Cooper Rush has to take over for Lamar Jackson. For
my God.
How the hell does that system change?
Oh, my God. That's such a great point. But you know what? He's there, and I give him credit.
He got a job.
And to me, obviously the Cowboys went out and they picked up Joe Milton, who had some time in New England and showed some things, I think. Yeah. But what I'm fascinated, and I know there's some idiots out there like, we put in Milton. Milton's better than Dak. No, he's not. Shut up. But is Joe Milton at least Cooper Rush's equal as a backup quarterback as it relates to this team?
You're going to hate me because I feel like I escape these questions more so than not. Ask me at the end of the preseason.
I'll forget.
Ask me when there's been.
It's not fair to me. I'm asking you to predict right now because
I think if it were to happen this year, you'd be on pins and needles. I think if you gave him a year in the system in 2026, you had to ask him to do this. Yeah. I think you'd feel a lot more comfortable.
All right, it'll be interesting. They won't carry 3 quarterbacks, will they?
Yes, they'll carry 3.
All right, we're getting some pressure from Candy Bolden, who, thank you very much for staying awake. I know you probably fought some sleep on this one. Nick, have a great vacation. I know God only knows you've earned it, so I really hope you enjoy your time off before you go out to Oxnard, where that I'm not happy about, the fact that you get to sit out there in 72-degree weather while it'll be 172 degrees here. For all of your Cowboys coverage needs, be sure to check us out on StarTelegram.com. We will see you next month.